I've been playing self-worth again. Ain't it nice to play pretend? The Seattle Garages, Needs of the Many. The Daily Grind, Chapter 171. James cautiously tested the mound of snow in front of them with a pole, eyeing the pile with suspicious thoughts. So far, this area around the lake had been empty of anything hostile, or even moving, aside from them. But there was always time for a mobile snowbank to take a shot at him, and so he poked first and investigated second. "Seems okay," he spoke in a voice muffled by his face covering to Arush, who had come with him on this short scavenging trip. The others were back at their little rest spot, though Alana and Alex had already taken a turn to do a sweep along the cliff wall when they'd stopped against it. None of them were venturing out too far, so backup was always within easy reach if they needed it, but they were also taking a chance to rest. After all, they'd covered several uphill miles so far over the hours they'd been in and or on the mountainous dungeon. Arush didn't reply to James with words, just gave a rattling little hiss and moved forward, the boots that Sarah had refitted for him crunching against the powdery snow, tight against his paws. The rat roach would move forward, then sweep his gaze around, before signaling it was okay and letting James make the same leapfrog motion as well. Both of them were trying to do this without looking too closely at the ice crystal hovering suspended over the shattered frozen lake. So far they'd found nothing, and they'd probably been at this for almost an hour. James was prepared to call it and go sit for a bit before they started trying to climb again, though there wasn't really anything around here to hide secrets that they wanted to approach too closely. They could have checked out the lake shore, or tried to wedge deeper into one of the small cracks in the rock of the cliff face, but that seemed pointlessly risky at this point of their scouting trip. Instead, James was mostly just trying to stay alert for dungeon nonsense, while focusing as little as possible on how the cold was starting to creep in, and how he was pretty sure there was snow inside his boot, making it squish when he walked. The dry suit made it not a huge problem, but it was annoying. So instead, James took the chance to try to start up some conversation. "You doing okay?" he asked the rat roach he'd come out scavenging with. Arush didn't look at him, instead keeping his head moving like a sentry turret, sweeping the empty landscape. "Fine," the big creature coughed out. "Okay, I just ask because I worry, you know," James said, shrugging. "We haven't talked much, and since we're mostly finding ice and dirt, I figured I'd see how you were doing." There was a long silence. "Cold," the rat roach said, rasping out the word. "Colder than ever been. It smells like where I'm from. Like home." James grimaced. "I know it's not really my place to say this, but you don't have to call the sewer home, you know? Home isn't... I mean, people might use the word differently sometimes, but to us, home isn't where you're from, it's where you go back to." "And where I came from, my origin," Arush corrected, with the closest thing the rat roach had to a neutral voice. He still didn't look at James. "Sorry, I'm bad at this," James sighed, and pulled his face cover down to wipe at his mouth and nose. "We haven't really talked much. I understand if you don't want to. I think we've tried to stab each other more than we've tried to have a conversation, so I guess I don't know what to say. Do I ask you how you're enjoying being back in a dungeon? That seems kinda shitty. Do I ask you how your partner's doing? Are we that close? Are we friends?" Arush was halfway through a lunge for James's throat before James noticed that he was moving, and had frozen before James jerked back. One of his left paws was outstretched, the extra joint in the elbow unfolding, claws trying to stab through the glove he was wearing from the inside. Arush's face, even with non-human eyes and a covered muzzle, betrayed a riot of conflicting emotion, starting with anger and fear and ending with shame. Wordlessly, he closed the claws back into a fist and pulled back, shifting to face away, shoulders slumping so far he lost a half a foot of height. Sorry," he rasped out. "I'm sorry." "What the fuck?" James whispered. He'd been startled, but far from being truly afraid, concern took over instead, and he stepped after Arush, raising a hand but not quite feeling confident in setting it on the rat roach's shoulder. "What was that?" he asked, voice steady. "Failure," Arush commented. Again." No, that's not really an explanation, James pushed. I don't need, secrets or anything, but I'd like you to be able to tell me what's going on. We're going to be in more danger as we go up. This seems like something that shouldn't just sit unsaid. Arush started to say something else, but the edge of one of his jutting fangs caught on the balaclava he was wearing. With angry, frustrated motions that probably took more energy than was needed, he swiped a trio of hands over his face, ripping off the covering and balling it up in an angry fist. Bad memories, he said to James, voice clearer but still stuttering. A bad life. Arush heaved a breath. You don't care about Kika. You don't understand what that means. His words were still staggered, despite the language knowledge that he had, and he had to pant for breath to talk at length, but it was important enough to keep going. Below, there, if someone knew, would kill him to hurt me, or tell the beautiful one to hurt us both. A weakness to exploit, anything to crawl over the corpses. He snarled out the words. I forgot. You are different. I'm sorry. Okay, no worries, James said quietly. He stepped back and sighed. I forget you're not, I don't know, socialized? That sounds stupid and colonialist, but whatever. You're not used to us. He shrugged as Arush turned to him. Things will get better. I mean, people suck sometimes, I'm not going to lie, but at least in the Order we're not about the whole corpse ladder thing. We pull each other up. That means you too. If you want. Arush stared at James's face for a minute, wiping away the blue acidic drool that spilled from the corner of his muzzle. I do. We do. Kika is doing well. He answered the earlier question. Okay, good. Now, let's get back to... Ah! James's word turned into a yelp as his foot snagged on something under the snow and he tumbled forward to slam into the ground. The impact lessened by the soft white all around, but his knees still stung from the hit. Unsure of what was going on, he thrashed to his feet, trying to kick off whatever was on him. A second later, Arush was at his side, grabbing him and hauling upward, shocking James with the casual strength the rat roach displayed. Most of his species, in James's experience, were not weak, not really, but somewhat fragile. Like in the way that Arush couldn't speak for very long without having to pant for breath, many rat roaches couldn't move for very long without finding their muscles straining, their limbs failing. But either way, James was yanked out of the snow with a wet snap as his boot tugged through something. Arush set him off to the side, while James brushed snow out of his coat, the two of them shuffling away from the spot that now had a human-sized crater in it. Ow, he wheezed. Also thanks. We lift each other up, Arush said simply. James snorted a laugh as the tension left him. Okay, that's stupid and corny even for me. What got me? He asked. Nothing moved as they watched the spot. Eventually, James caught Arush's eye and gave a small nod, moving forward in a low crouch while his scavenging partner watched his back. When he got to where the snow had been packed down from his impact and all the stomping around he and Arush had done, the culprit was kind of obvious. It's a vine, James called back. Looks like a blackberry, actually, he told Arush, who had no context for what that meant, as he approached. The two ends of the plant poked out of the ground from where the natural snare had grabbed around James's boot. It looked a little like a blackberry, but James couldn't ignore the skill orb knowledge in the back of his head that was shaming him for not recognizing that the thorns were too long and there was what looked like some kind of pale blue veins of liquid running through the middle. That sap, or whatever it was now dripping out onto the ground. James knelt, looking for a closer peek. He watched a drop of the blue fluid touch the ground and instantly puff out into a small pile of fresh snow. Is this some kind of coolant? He looked up, perplexed. It's making more snow, he told Arush. Something had to make the snow, the rat roach rasped back, voice starting to fail. Okay, I'm not... James pinched the bridge of his nose with gloved fingers. I don't know if I need to explain snow to you or if you're making a joke, but also I guess this is a dungeon, so something did have to make the snow. Okay, Good point. He sighed and stood, dusting more of that snow off his knees. Do you see... there? He turned and followed the rough direction the vine stretched with his eyes, pointing out a patch of raised snowbank to Arush. Want to see if there's fruit on that? He asked. The rat-roach shook his head, but James questioned his spirit of adventure, and shortly they found themselves having cleared some of the covering white powder off what turned out to be a several-meter diameter patch of thorned vines and cool blue leaves. It was actually colder here, near this plant, than anywhere they'd been so far, and it was as James was picking a handful of translucent blue berries off a vine that he realized they were sapping the heat out of his hand right through the glove. They didn't linger long, but they did grab a small bag full of the fruit before James admitted they probably weren't going to uncover any magical powers, aside from the ingredients to the easiest smoothie ever. He took a clipping of the vine, too. Somebody would probably be interested in that. As the two of them headed back to the camp to rest before the group moved on, he realized he hadn't asked Arush the actual important question. Hey, what do you mean when you said this place smells like your... birthplace? Arush froze and then shook his head. Not this place. The smell is here, not from here. James raised an eyebrow and made a please elaborate gesture. It's Nikhail. He smells wrong. That's worrying. Why didn't you... Oh, because you didn't know speaking up would get you hurt. Yeah, okay, I get that. James sighed, angry at the world. Well, angry at the sewer. Okay, that's... I'm going to talk to him when we get back. Is it because he has a lesson? No, that doesn't make sense. I've got one, and I... Wait, do I smell? He was suddenly self-conscious. You have to tell me if I smell. You? You smell like books. And quiet fear. And some chemicals. Oh, that's my deodorant. Okay, I'm fine then. James sighed. Alright, let's get back. My legs are starting to hurt from the high stepping to avoid tripping again. It's cute that James gets these bonding moments with people, Alana commented with a small amount of snark as she and Anesh watched Arush haul James out of the snow a couple 100 meters away. The two of them let the tension drain as they saw James was okay, and that his swearing at the ground wasn't active combat they needed to come intervene in. Hey, quick question though, while he's gone. Are both the rat roaches named Arush? Is that a species name and I didn't notice? Anesh let out a slow breath, glancing away from watching the steam dance in the chill air to raise eyebrows at Alana. What? No, this is Arush. The other one is... not Arush. He has a name though. Why do you ask? I mean, if this is the same guy, isn't he missing arms? Alana said. Then, with considerably more worry in her voice, Wait, is he missing arms? Did something happen? They're staying in Taunton. Is this JP's fault? I'll break his arms if you let something happen to our precious new furry kids. First off, pump the brakes a little bit, Anesh told her, lightly leaning against the cold stone outcrop. Behind them, a small fire was dying out, the smell of wood smoke seeping into the fur of his coat. You know, you can just ask him these things, right? But, yeah, it's not JP's fault for once. Arush's other two arms are... let's not call them vestigial, but they aren't super useful, so Sarah put pockets inside his suit that he can slip them into. Probably more comfortable, certainly safer. That's going to make the armor awkward, huh? Alana hummed. Wait, did Sarah's refit power work on armor? I thought she said it was clothing only. It is. He's not wearing armor. Alana's mouth puckered like she'd taken a bite of the angriest lemon. Excuse me? The fuck? That's not okay. Anesh sighed. I don't think they have the best outlook on self-preservation, he admitted. Also, they're heading back. You want to gather up the... He stopped, interrupted by a small tug in the back of his mind. He could leave if he wanted to. Right now. The fire called to him, sung a song of freedom, escape. All he had to do was take it, and he could leave. Next to him, Alana whipped her head around to stare at their campfire too, and he saw Nick and Alex peeking up as well. Nikhail looking up from the journal he was writing in, Alex's eyes snapping open from where she was trying to pretend she was cool by napping in a dungeon. Anesh shook his head and pushed it away. "All right," he said. "Mark time." Anesh checked the timer on the copied smartphone he'd brought. 5 hours, 18 minutes in the dungeon. Alana? Exactly 1 hour at camp. Wait, but Alex and I left for a bit, so... James and Arush took that moment to step back into the covered space, the shelter from the light wind welcome. "Hey, what are y'all up to?" he asked. "Did you get the exit prompt?" Anesh asked him. "Nope. Did you?" Anesh nodded. "Okay, we all did, but not you. So the one constant is the fire itself. That means if we do want to escape, we need to build a fire, keep it going, and be at it when the 1 hour mark ticks over. Nothing else matters? Any thoughts?" "Oh, I'm sure something else matters," Nick commented. "But will it be enough to kill us?" "Probably," James said quickly. "Which is why we're big old cheaters who brought telepads along." He sighed. "Okay, I'm going to sit for a bit, and then cliff things." "Yeah, farther up. We've only had one thing try to kill us so far, and I'm kind of disappointed," Alana announced, drawing a wince from her boyfriend's. "I want to have a fight. Come on, don't tell me you guys don't." James opened his mouth to answer, and then closed it and shook his head. He kind of got where she was coming from, but also he didn't really want a fight. He mostly felt like just poking around and seeing what secrets this place had, but if it was going to try to kill him, he wasn't just going to say okay. "Well, our girlfriend's bloodlust aside, do you have any details for the plan?" Anesh asked. James shrugged, settling to a dry spot on the floor. Protective gear or not, he still didn't need to be any damper than he already was. "I didn't see any particularly good spots for the climb. You two?" he asked Alex and Alana. It was Alex who answered as she rose to a kneeling position, unzipping one of the large packs they'd brought. "There's a kind of, I don't know what to call it, like a chunky part of the cliff. It's got little bits sticking out that we could probably step on. We could try there," she asked, pulling a set of pitons out of the pack. "All right. Everyone with an A name, you want to go get started on that? Nick and I will catch up to you in a minute," James said, nodding at the group from his seated spot. "We will?" Nikhail paused and shouldering his own pack. "We will," James said firmly as the others started moving. In short order they were packed up and had the needed tools out, with the fire left to smolder and cast increasingly thin heat into the freezing air. The group chattered lightly as they moved out, with Alana boisterously trying to see if she could get Arush to laugh as they headed the 100 feet or so to the part of the cliff that was apparently the least problematic. James shifted to look at Nick, propping an elbow up on his knee and trying to relax while sitting on a freezing cold patch of rock. "So hey," James started. "Did I do something wrong?" Nick asked. "I thought things were going okay." He sounded like he was that variety of nervous that James remembered from when he was called into an authority figure's office back in high school. James sighed. "You're probably not in trouble, and the delve has been going fine, and you need to work on not freezing up when something unexpected happens, but that's a matter of experience, and also not what we're talking about." He shifted, trying in vain to get comfortable, and decided to just be direct. "Arush says you smell like the sewer." "Oh, that's kind of mean." Nick's voice came out angry. Not insulted angry, but defensive angry. "And we've been hiking. We probably all smell sweaty and gross under the—" "Nick," James cut him off with a hand held up. "You smell like the sewer." James didn't look away as he saw Nikhail flinch. "And you obviously know why. Can you just tell me?" There was a silence where James was pretty sure Nick was deciding whether or not to just lie, but to the young man's credit, he kept his mouth shut until he decided. James could remember all too well the feeling of tripping over himself to make some bullshit up when he could have just paused and then answered normally. He was kind of glad that Nick didn't try that. The answer still unsettled him. "Shaper substance," Nick said quietly, turning to scuff his boots on the edge of their little overhang, thumping his shoulder into the rock where the wind started to whip past his face. "I've been dosed with the shaper substance." James had already started to nod, but then froze when he realized what Nick was saying. "The highly radioactive fluid?" he asked, his voice rising an octave. "What? No, no, it's the other stuff, the goo that you and Anesh brought out of the sewer." Nick grimaced. "It's how the rat roaches remake themselves. It's that thing. Deb and Reed are looking into finding a way to make it less painful. We've got a bunch of it from samples you brought back. Deb wants to use it to, rebuild the rat roach's speech ability. That whole thing." James cut in, stopping Nick's erratic rambling. "Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Did you get exposed to it by accident during the... Oh, wow, you look so guilty. Holy shit." James couldn't help himself from taking a tangent. "Does Reed have any idea about this?" he asked. "No," came the meek reply. "Did Deb's idea about reducing the pain get any results?" James asked, starting to become a little annoyed. "Not really," Nick answered. "I feel like I know the answer to this, but fucking why?" James snapped out the last two words, going from calm to irritated speech mid-sentence. "Why in the world would you think that was a good idea, especially since you're wearing the last time you did something reckless and stupid as a glove right now?" James jabbed a finger at Nick's authority, the nascent little infomorph wrapped around his arm. If there was a right thing to say, that wasn't it. Nick's defensiveness went from guilty to angry really fast. "I just wanted my own body," he yelled back, voice cracking. "You gonna be mad at me for being the wrong gender now?" he snapped at James. James froze, and then took a minute to take a deep breath. He pulled his goggles up to his forehead, took his gloves off, and slowly rubbed at his eyes. "Oh my God," he muttered. "You absolute dumbass. I am so not mad about that. I forgot you were trans. Nick, I was thinking about the fact that you spiked yourself with weird experimental dungeon serum that causes crippling pain." He was on his feet now, pacing back and forth by the remains of their fire in the tight confines of the little overhang. "What would have happened if something went wrong? Did you even tell anybody? Nick, you could have died. Again." "But I didn't." "Yeah, I know. It's a really bad confirmation bias," James said, and then huffed out something that was half laugh, half groan. "You think this isn't something we were planning to do anyway?" he asked, his voice suddenly soft. "You think we'd just leave you out in the fucking cold like that? Alana and I were talking about literally this 30 near-death experiences ago. The Shaper substance is the most important magic we found. I'm not mad you want to change yourself. I'm mad that you did it alone. I'm not even mad," James sighed. "I'm not mad. I just wish you'd asked for help." "I was worried someone would say no," Nick said quietly. "Dude," James snorted, "have you met us? I say yes to so many crazy ideas, it's a miracle I'm still alive. I'm here." He shook his head and stopped pacing. "Okay. Everything is fine. Assuming you're okay? You're not in constant crippling pain or anything?" Nick." James frowned. "Nick, really?" "It's not that bad." Nikhil threw his hands up defensively. "I'm okay." "Oh, I absolutely don't believe you," James replied. "But I'm not going to send you home yet. If anything changes, you're teleporting out instantly, though. Got it?" James waited for a sheepish nod before continuing. "And when we get back, Deb and Lua are going to give you a barrage of tests to make sure you're stable, and I'm certain Deb will have some words for you. Words like why and thee and fuck, probably in that order." "You really like saying things that way, don't you?" Nick asked, idly kicking at the snow. James just stared until he broke. "Oh, okay, yeah. Thanks. I'm sorry." "People keep saying that to me today. You know, I came here to explore, not dive headfirst into interpersonal drama." James mock scowled. "Alright, let's go. Looks like Alana's 10 feet off the ground already. I don't want to be left behind." He paused for a second. Would you like a hug? I'm trying to get better about giving hugs." Nick paused. "I, yeah? Yeah, I would." but maybe when we aren't wearing 40 pounds of climbing gear? Good call. Let's get moving. The others hadn't gone too far ahead. Alana was just setting pitons into the stone, using a well-balanced hammer and an inhuman amount of strength to drive the metal spikes into cracks in the rock. She was maybe 3 or 4 steps up already, though the term step was kind of a misnomer. They were roughly triangular shapes with a surface that was barely flat enough for somebody to feel like they could set their foot on it. Like someone had reached into the rock and pulled chunks out on hidden hinges and then ruined them for anyone who might want to try climbing up. And yet, it was still probably easier than scaling the cliff without the help. Cliff wasn't even the right term, really. It wasn't like the wall in front of them was forming a perfect 90-degree angle with the ground. It sloped back, if only barely, enough that James figured he could have gotten up with a little determination and a lot of upper body strength. It wasn't even their only option to keep moving, really. They could have tried doubling back or circling around, though the ridge did extend for at least a couple miles, or they simply could have gone a different direction. But those options didn't really accomplish what they were here for. The only thing they knew about this dungeon and its magic was this: the higher up you got, the better. Maybe there were more secrets to uncover, but that was what they had as a guiding focus. Farther up, and if they learned more along the way, so much the better. James went up last, waiting at the bottom and keeping an eye out for anything dangerous while everyone else went first. Alex had the hardest time, with a couple of close calls as her boots slipped on the icy rock, but ultimately the cliff wasn't impossible for people like them who were both augmented and in decent shape. For James it was even easier. Once the first couple of them were at the top, Alana threw down a rope, wrapped and tied off around a claw-like rock protrusion. After securing it to his climbing harness, it took James half the time as it took the vanguard to make his way up. Probably with far less stress, since he was in less danger of falling. Ideally, Alana would have gone first alone, and then gotten the rest of them up the easy way, but there was no way of knowing if they were at risk of being ambushed from either side, so they moved in groups and they played it safe. When James brought up the rear and pulled himself over the edge of the ridge, it was with a sigh of relief as his aching fingers no longer had to maintain a tight grip. "Hey, you think the exercise potion works on sore fingers?" he asked, flexing his hands and trying to get blood flowing properly again. "Could be," Anesh said, eyes closed as he tried to get a good look at where they were going through a skull-jacked drone camera. "But we have 3 more of those to go, so maybe save 'em." "Super," James grumbled. It was only about 30 feet to the next cliff. A little flat plain of snow, and then another wall. James went first this time, Alana and a rush behind him while the other 3 kept watch below, and it was more stressful, knowing that he could fall. Cold wind whipped around his head, small specks of flying ice briefly flicked against his goggles as the occasional plume of frozen crystals was kicked off the ledge above them by the wind. The wind was getting faster, too. The temperature was getting lower. His heart nearly exploded in his chest when he grabbed a handhold, a small indentation in the rock, and the shadow inside it moved. James assumed for a second he was seeing things, but then he felt teeth clamp down on his fingers and deflect, like his skin was made of iron. But he could feel how bad it was, razor-sharp fangs, like some kind of organic wood chipper, frantically gnawing away at his hand. On reflex, James jerked backwards, swinging out and losing half his footing, barely hanging on with his other hand in a death grip. Flinging his right arm wide, he flicked his hand and sent the small ball of shadows and teeth flying into the open air. He didn't see where it landed, and he hoped the wind covered up the squeal he made when it surprised him. Below him, Alana yelled a question over the wind. James, frantically trying not to fall, triggered the status quo glove on his left hand and dug his fingers into the rock he was tightly gripping, burning one of the charges to make a new, much easier handhold. The glove was still new, so that charge wouldn't come back for a few days, but it felt worth it to pull himself back up. When he reached the next handhold, he realized the glove on his right hand was just gone. Bare fingers tried to close on frozen rock, and he winced as the pain of the cold invaded his body down to the bone. but he didn't let go. He couldn't. They had a backup glove anyway, and 20 feet over the ground was no place to stop. He hauled himself up. He kept moving. James was entirely unsurprised when he pulled himself over the edge and had to roll through the frozen shell of iced-over snow to dodge a slamming strike pile of snow that was neither frozen nor immobile. He was shocked, sure, startled, but he wasn't actually surprised. Two beady onyx eyes of stone stared down at him from a rounded face. The whole creature, a different shade of white than the snow around it, was curved in sloped lines. Momo hadn't been kidding. It really was just a pile of snow that sometimes grew pillar-like arms and tried to punch you with them. When it opened its mouth, it was like a seam splitting apart, revealing a maw full of jagged obsidian chunks. James rolled sideways over his own backpack, kicked himself to his feet on the edge of the cliff, and awkwardly slammed his left hand into one of its eyes, firing off another glove charge. The little chunk of stone detonated like a grenade. By the time Alana pulled herself up after him, the snow monster's body had started to melt into liquid that James suspected was just water. Then it started to freeze again, forming a lump of ice that he had to awkwardly circumvent with the rope for the follow-up group. Alana kicked at it as she stood, shattering a chunk off and nearly slipping when it crumbled easily. "You okay?" she asked him loudly. "I heard you scream. Twice." "It's one of those days," James yelled back over the rising wind, frozen fingers fumbling to make a decent knot. "Can you grab me a backup glove from my pack?" he asked, turning to present his back to her while Arush pulled himself up behind them. "Arush, keep an eye out. The mountain's trying to kill us now." The rat roach nodded, stepped past him to keep a lookout, casually drawing one of the blades strapped to his climbing harness and holding it in a casual side grip. "What happened to your glove?" Alana asked him as she passed him the backup. James grinned under his face covering as he took it from her. The tactile sensation transmitted through the circles he'd drawn on all these things with the weird Officium Mundi pen, letting it feel like they just brushed their hands together in truth. "Oh, Shadow Thing ate it. Not me, though." He held up his bare hand, turning it back and forth to check for marks as he stripped off the destroyed remains of the original glove. No damage, even though he knew he'd felt deadly sharp teeth on his skin like knives. But it had left not so much as a nick. And James wasn't like Alana. His skin wasn't bulletproof. "Maybe it just eats gloves," Alana asked. "That's actually really bad," James pointed out, fumbling his now wet and frozen hand into the new glove and pointing at his other hand with one of the status quo gloves on it. "Some of our gloves are worth way more than the others," he said. They were going to have to keep a sharper eye out for those things lurking on cliffs in the future, if that was even their only environment. After a quick discussion, Alana pulled one of their flares out of James's pack before resealing it just as the others made it to the top behind them. The next cliff passed mostly without incident. The light of the flare, bright and red, scared the little gear-eater shadows away, the shadows flowing like liquid out of their holes as the team passed. The wind picked up. Everyone but Alana downed exercise potions. They did work, easing the pain on sore ligaments and aching muscles. Arush had to be prodded into taking one, the rat roach seeming standoffish at first, until James pressed him with questions. He had, of course, been trying to avoid showing weakness again without thinking about it. James was 0% interested in putting up with that today, though, when it could get one or more of them killed, especially Arush. The cold got worse. "Hey, check this out," Alex called as they began to prepare for the last cliff in the line. She was holding up something she'd found wedged against the rock. "Guys, look!" James checked behind them. There was no gray mass bearing down on them like he'd worried, no wall of clouds and wind. Instead, there was just more snow falling, thicker and thicker black specks dotting the sky, blotting it out. The clear hours were fading fast, but he had time to see what Alex had found. "What you got?" he yelled back. She started to turn toward the group, but faltered, and then took much more determined and stable steps, which James appreciated. No risky movements here, not when they only had 10 feet of clear space between them and a fall, and no wandering off alone anymore, not when they were hostile things afoot. Anesh was keeping up a drone watch every time they made it over an edge, and everyone was taking turns to stand lookout. When Alex made it back to where Alana had started hammering a couple pitons into the rock, she held up something James absolutely wasn't expecting. "Found this in the little nook over there," she called over the wind, and handed James a hubcap. It was still covered in ice, though a large chunk had broken off when Alex had picked it up. James tapped it a few times, then applied pressure and broke away the frozen covering. The ice glittered as it fell to the ground in the fading gray light, but the hubcap didn't break. He turned it over a couple of times. Metal, a little heavy, a little bit of warping, a lot of scratches, like it had been in a crash, maybe? But why? "What?" Anesh said incredulously as he alighted his drone on his outstretched hand and unplugged from it. "Where the bloody hell did that come from?" "I just found it," Alex said. What do we do?" "I don't know if I want to carry it. It's kind of heavy." James looked around at the last 30 feet of rock to climb, at the plumes of snow kicked around their legs. "Nah, this is weird. I don't want to realize 2 days from now this would have been important. Into my pack." He turned, giving Alex access to his bag, pressing up against the cliff where the wind would be at least a little less horrible for this maneuver. A few seconds of fumbling with a zipper later, a weight was added to his burden, and James stood and readjusted. "Okay, let's keep going." "We should build a railgun for this," Alana said, putting her weight on one of the pitons to test it. "I'll consider it. Now get moving. We'll cover you," he yelled back. "The top is clear, but there's too much storm to see far," Anesh added. "We need to get to cover soon." Alana just gave a single nod back and started climbing hand over hand, pulling herself up easily with her enhanced strength and normal physique. Alana had been well muscled before, and multiple types of magic had only made her even more physically impressive, but this was starting to get to the limits of what she could do. A climb that demanded precise movements in the most hostile weather imaginable was a lot different than her preferred environment of a chaotic brawl or a gym. But she still made it up to the top anyway. The snow up here rose up in a great sweeping slope ahead of the cliff, quickly getting so tall Alana couldn't see past it, though the lack of visible mountain behind it through the storm probably meant there was something at least approaching flat ground on the other side. The storm was picking up in earnest now, visibility dropping as the whirling snow and ice in the air made it feel like being inside a snow globe. Finding no convenient rock to tie off their length of rope to, Alana leaned over the edge to give Alex a hand up, the girl flinching slightly as her face swung past the flare wedged into one of the upper handholds. Hauling the younger girl up, Alana crouched again, braced her feet on the most stable ground she could find under the snow that came up to her knees, and hauled a rush up next. Needing to get the other three up as fast as possible, she took the next logical path and looped the rope around herself, clipping it to her harness before throwing it down. "Hold this," Alana said, passing Arush their end of it. "And hold on." She planted her feet again, jerking slightly in a trio of small movements as she felt James, and then Anesh, and then Nick, all put their weight on the rope and start the process of ascending. Her arms strained, and she felt her boots crunch deeper into the packed snow, but between herself and the overarmed tank of a person behind her, it wasn't a challenge to hold on long enough for James and the others to surmount the edge. Alana pulled the rope up after them, leaving it on her harness and holding it in the loose coil at her side. "Storm's getting louder," she called in response to something James had said. "I can barely hear you." James nodded. Harder and harder to hear everyone else, and there was a sharp tapping sound that took him a minute to realize was the increasingly icy snowfall rapping off the exposed plastic of their armor. "Let's cover that hill," he yelled, pointing. "If we need to, we can burrow into it, but let's see if there's an easier option." "All right, everybody line up," Alana yelled, passing the rope to all of them to clip through their harnesses. With the ability to see farther than 20 feet starting to become a problem, no one wanted to be the one who took a slight pause and ended up missing. "Ready?" "No!" Alex yelled back. "Can we take a coffee break?" James was pretty sure she was joking, but he could feel the exposed parts of his skin starting to crystallize in the cold, and he was uninterested in banter right now, especially not when he had to shout to make it happen. Instead, he just called for a move out, fell into the end of the line, and let Alana take them forward. The snowy hill ate their boots, the loose white ground swallowing them up past the waist as they walked, forcing the group to trudge forward in an agonizing pace as they carved a trench behind them. For James it was almost easy. He was following 5 other people's paths cleanly, even though his feet were still sinking a foot into the ground with each step. He should have known better than to think that. In reality, it had been 5 minutes of pushing themselves forward, but in James's head it felt like only a blink of a chilled eye between thinking, this isn't too bad, and then the snowy crunch of something heavy hitting the ground nearby. Then there was another crunch, the noise of wet snow smashed down to a hard-packed form, the kind of sound you got when the first car in a neighborhood took the risk and pulled out of a driveway on a snowy day. A bit squeaky, a bit crunchy, except sudden and violent. The snow changed. James felt it as, mixed in with the thick flakes and icy rivets, heavy, finger-thick shards of ice started falling too. They mostly bounced off his coat, but when one cracked into his goggles hard enough that he felt his skull rattle, he knew that things were starting to get serious. Then, another crunch, but this one close, right next to him in fact. When an armchair-sized, spiked urchin of glittering blue ice slammed down into the ground, leaving its upper half to rapidly start being swallowed by the snow, while the grim threat remained obvious. In front of him, James saw Nick's head whip around at the impact site. He shared a look with James, but neither of them paused in their movements. The sooner they were out of this storm, the better, because if they were in this storm for too long, one of those was going to hit one of them. The line ahead of him sped up, and James increased his own speed to match, no one wanting to be stuck here any longer than they needed to be. Alana and Arush were out of sight now, just swallowed by the driving snow that came in great plumes and threatened to overwhelm anyone that stood still for more than a minute. But the line was still pulling, and James had faith in them, and the rope. He was entirely unsurprised when he passed by the rapidly freezing corpse of one of those snow beasts, shards of shattered eye bits scattered across the path. He was more surprised when the line started to get some slack, and he caught up to everyone else, Anesh catching his eye and waving him and Nick over as they approached. He yelled something over the wind and pointed at the thing that they had stopped by. An out-of-place pylon, sticking up through the middle of the snowy hill, defiantly casting a strange yellow wear-light onto the surrounding canvas of white. "What in the fuck is this?" James yelled, his voice consumed by the wind. No one answered him, partly because no one heard him clearly, but also because it was hard to explain why a working traffic light was sitting here on this hill, stuck on yellow. But they didn't have time to sit around and examine it. So far, it hadn't tried to kill any of them, so they kept moving. Just a few dozen steps away from cresting the hill, and 2 heavy, spiked ice impacts nearby, urging them on. When they did get over it, James was treated to the sight of a small valley, slightly protected from the driving snow and a little bit clearer, just enough that he could see the crescent of cliffs that outlined their momentary salvation. The hill they just covered, right at the mouth of the valley, James made a note to come back and check for an easier way up when the storm died down. For now, they pressed forward, the wind lessening somewhat as the party crossed the threshold of the cliffs. The snow and ice kept going, though, and James moved himself to the middle of the group, keeping his reflexes dialed up to maximum as he watched the sky for incoming projectiles. They passed a few trees, which they steered clear of, unsure if the bare branches hid more stick monsters. They passed another streetlight, too, this one flickering a green left turn signal. Moving with cautious steps, they started skirting the outside wall, looking for a good place to set down and make camp. A camp or alcove or something that they could hide from the storm in. It was better here, yes, but it was still getting worse by the minute, and visibility was low. Then, Alana, alternating sharing perception with Anesh as they swept different sides of the party, spotted something that they couldn't possibly pass by. With a muffled shout and a pointed finger, she directed their attention forward and left to the cliff at the end of the valley. The cliff that had a lot of strange, dark, rectangular holes in it, and columns near the base that looked artificial, and... "Is that a goddamn apartment building?" James yelled, his voice finally carrying over a lull in the wind. If it wasn't, it was something that was awfully close. Frozen over, with snow packed up to the second floor in a slope, but it was. It was a building. In fact, it looked like the entire cliff face might be a buried structure, dark and cold, but also, importantly, not outside. James was about to get them moving when something twinged in his awareness. The confluence of a half-dozen different powers and skills came together for a brief instant as his brain warned him about something with barely enough time to do anything about it. Without thinking, he ripped as much speed from Anesh as he could, feeding it into his agility-enhanced legs, threw himself sideways, and crashed into Nick. Nikhail went sprawling, crashing into a new divot in the unblemished snow. Unharmed, though, his armor taking most of that impact. James did not hit the snow. Instead, the snow hit him. A spike of ice, screaming out of the sky at high velocity, cut through where Nick's head had been a split second ago. Fortunately, James was still moving, following Nick down to the ground, trying to take cover, so his head wasn't there instead. But the razor-sharp spine of ice caught him on the arm and went straight through his coat, and the armor underneath, and the arm underneath that, and out the other side, painting the snow with a splatter of red. James and Nick both screamed, for different reasons, James collapsing to the snow face first as his arm gave out when he tried to prop himself up without thinking. Nick was already moving, rolling him over and holding up a hand, the vibrant green of his authority unfolding as he gave it quick orders. Repair the internal damage, set the bone, seal the wound, hold in place. None of those things did much for the pain, and James was suddenly struggling to keep his focus long enough to manage the input from the purple orb that dialed up his senses. The pain overwhelmed him, and he caught the next part of the trip in flashes. People freaking out, Anesh staying calm as he reclaimed his own speed, more ice coming down, some near misses, a simple set of objectives laid out. Get into cover. Alana slung him over her shoulder like a sack of potatoes and ran through the snow, with Nick keeping close to maintain Adami's hold on his injury. They reached the apartment structure just as the ice storm was intensifying to almost certain lethality. Arush loped up the drift of snow to the second-floor window, running on every limb he had as he took point, and smashed through the remainder of the broken glass shoulder first. Anesh and Alex were right behind him, their guns out, ready to shoot any hostile resistance. When Alana passed him through the window, James staggered to his feet, regaining some of his ability as a foreign presence in his self reached into the metaphysical control board for his different powers and started adjusting things. Dialing back his pain receptors, linking his endurance and blood production and clotting. Soon he could stand, even if he was sweating and grinding his teeth from the pain that he was still feeling. The six of them stopped in the bedroom that they'd crashed into, heaving for breath. Alex recovered first, turning to look outside at the devastation the storm was raining down. Arm-length spikes of ice were falling, 2 or 3 a second, scattered across the landscape. A screaming, high-pitched tone where the wind was catching on the window, frozen scraps of ancient cloth fluttering wildly against the wall. "Ow!" James gasped out. "Everyone okay?" Alana turned to present her back to them. Quick question, is there..." she started to ask, twisting to see what was behind her. Alex gently reached up and plucked the icicle out of her backpack. It had dug deep. It had probably ruined something important, too. "Yeah," she said, throwing the frozen spear out the window behind them. Unharmed," Arush said simply, gasping out the word, crouched near the shattered, rotted wood of the bedroom's door. It sounded like for him, talking had taken more breath than sprinting. I'm all right, Anesh said. Froze up there for a second. Sorry. My bad. James's words were more like gasps of air than his normal smooth tone. Had to take some speed from you. Thanks, Nick stammered out. I'm good too. Where are we? Bedroom, looks like, Alana said, slinging her pack off to make sure nothing was going to spill out through the hole. Okay, window makes this a bad place to stay. Let's get farther in. Everyone get ready. This place seems great for an ambush. I bet lots of terrible things live here. James nodded. Let's go down. Check the lobby. Should be insulated, sealed by the snow. He started trying to draw his sidearm, but Anesh stopped him, a pressed hand holding James's arm to his side. What? You're going to bring up the rear, Anesh said simply. Alex, with me, please. Arush, Alana, cover. He double-checked his own gun, tactile enhancement on the gloves, making it a lot less problematic to handle, and he stepped up to the door. Shall we? He asked. Alex nodded at him nervously, and Anesh leaned forward to rattle the handle, shoving the door open with a frozen crack as old ice split away and took some of the wood with it. The insides of the structure were bizarre. Concrete halls, rotted hard carpet, ice dripping from every surface, small piles of snow here and there, but no signs of life. There was old furniture, sure, but no skeletons, no footprints, nothing. Scraps of what were once coats, or small clumps of crumpled paper or take-out containers frozen into abstract sculptures that would never move again, but nothing that made this place look like anyone had been here for a very, very long time. It didn't take James long to realize something. This is a dorm, he said suddenly, and a little too loudly. Anesh glanced back at him, and James elaborated, keeping his voice down, now that he didn't have to fight with the wind to be heard. Look, the rooms are just bedrooms, or two-room apartments, kinda. This isn't an apartment, this is a dorm, a college dorm. Alana raised an eyebrow. So the lobby, she started to say. Might have vending machines, yeah, James finished for her. Not what I was thinking, but okay. His girlfriend rolled her eyes at him. Ahead of them, Anesh and Alex checked another door, making sure nothing was going to jump out at them. But then, beyond that, the hallway opened up into an open space. They were on the second floor, and the rough concrete hall flooring turned into a balcony that wrapped around open air over the common area. There were 5 other hallways leading out into the dorms, and 2 stairways on either side of the lobby that made this upper walkway into a kind of horseshoe. Down below, there was cold brick and concrete. A trio of old couches tried to pretend the place was homey or comfortable, and failed miserably. A dead fireplace sat embedded in a central brick pillar. James could see more hallways leading to more dorm rooms, as well as a small door with a frosted glass window that was probably a main office. Nothing moved. He and Anesh shared a suspicious glance. Then Anesh leaned over the balcony, grip on his gun tight, and called down. Anybody home? Nothing moved. This seems like as good as we're going to get, James sighed. Nick, how's my arm doing? He asked. There's a hole in it, Nick replied, like that was obvious. Thanks. Cool. I mean, how powerful is your healing nonsense? Nick jerked upright like he'd been slapped. Oh, you'll be okay, I guess. Aidemy keeps infection out. It's staving off the frostbite, too. And you heal fast, actually. She's just kind of helping it along. Should be good in, 3-4 hours, if you're warm. The answer actually kind of surprised James, who was used to healing taking a lot longer than that. He had kind of assumed that he would need to be telepathed out for safety. Okay, well, this seems like the place to camp then, James said. Let's get some tripwires up on these halls and get a fire going, okay? His suggestion was met with overwhelming agreement. 20 minutes later, after rigging up what were essentially cans on strings to all the hallway mouths as makeshift alarms, the lobby was starting to warm up. Slightly. A roaring fire cast orange light over the couches they'd dragged over, after making sure they weren't mimics or bombs or something worse. Alana was feeding a few chunks of oddly bent wood from the wallet of holding into the blaze, letting the fire that roared up from a kindled copy of Pony Things take its natural course. The Infinite magazine, which James gave a rude little grin at, was finally serving an actual purpose. "Okay," he said, around a mouthful of cold ravioli. "Good progress for the first day, I think. How's everyone doing?" Everyone being those of them who weren't actively keeping guard right now. "Exhausted," Anesh said. "Should have brought more exercise potions. We only have 2 left each now, and I could have used all of them today." Nick nodded as he set up a couple bedrolls from their packs onto the floor. "Yeah, I'm so tired. I barely did anything." "Oh, that reminds me," James said, trying and failing to snap his fingers. "Nick, are you okay with me explaining to Arush the thing?" Oh, sort of?" Nick seemed to shrink slightly under James's gaze. "Then I will sort of explain." James turned to the rat roach, who had, not unintentionally, set himself on the opposite side of their camp space from Nick. "He's been using the Shaper substance to fix his body. You don't have to worry about it. Can't do anything about the smell, though." Arush blinked his eyes at James in an uneven pattern of surprise. Like he hadn't actually expected a follow-up on that. Certainly not a real answer. He chittered out a breath, then turned to face Nick directly for the first time in this entire delve, voice rough and pained from the cold on top of his flawed biology. Do you require help?" Arush said. "I can show some tricks." He had to pause between words, both for breath and to consider what he was saying, but he still said it. I mean, if Reed doesn't get super mad about this and ban me from it forever, yes? Yeah, that sounds like... I'd like that. I didn't think to ask." Nick stumbled through something that was approaching real conversation. James just smirked and shook his head. "All right. Alana, Ben, Alex, how are y'all doing?" he called to the remainder of the group. "Hungry," Alana called back. "What do we have to eat in this place, anyway?" James looked down at the handmade ravioli that Nate had packed for them, which he was, like some kind of monster, eating without actually reheating it. Pretty good stuff, actually. Can I just say, I think the infinite lunchbox is kind of my favorite thing." He rose to his feet, wincing as he put too much weight on his damaged arm, and started unpacking a sealed plastic container of food for Alana. "Yeah, though now I'm super conscious of how bad it would be for one of those little shadowy eater things to get at one of our backpacks. Or worse, get one of the status quo gun bracelets." Anesh shook his head, ramming his eyes shut like he could will the idea away. "So we're going to keep going?" Alex asked as she walked past, taking a minute to enjoy the heat of the fire, even while she stayed standing and watching the hall. The orange-yellow light flickered off the solid wall of white behind them, where the snow had buried the front of the building and packed down to a monocolored sheet. "We could get out in, what, half an hour? We're already way farther in than the others got, and James is hurt." "I mean, we could, but I think we mostly got this. So far." "So far," James clarified as Nesh glared at him. "We can always fall back if we need to." He handed the pasta and a camp utensil to Alana, shaking his head at her smirk as he walked back to the fire. "Why, are you tired?" he asked Alex. "Ha! No," she lied as she blew a strand of hair out of her face. "But look, poor Ben and Nick are just so exhausted. Can we really make them go on?" The 2 boys gave her incredulous looks. "I'm going to bed," Nick announced, stretching out under a thermal blanket, harness and armor removed, but undersuit still on. "I will be fine, and sore, but also fine, and like James said, we can always fall back. We got time to rest, anyway. Besides, I doubt anything can make it through—" "Oh God, please stop," James said. "The storm, anyway. What?" Nick finished, giving a confused look. Anesh answered for James. That kind of thing is basically an invitation for a dramatic problem to occur, he said, looking up at the ceiling of the dorm's common area like he was waiting for something to smash through the window. Everyone went silent, watching him, and the room. For a few minutes with no sound but the crackling of the fire. Normally that works. Anesh broke the spell. James laughed, the sound infectious to the others who joined in. Outside, a storm raged, but here, in this empty, cold, dead building, they had a fire, a little food, and a little safety. They had some time to rest up, sleep properly, and double-check their gear, and to plan for tomorrow, to see how high they could reach together. When the pull came from the fire, none of them left. The 7 of them were eager to see what was next.